Our next speaker is Lane Boldman, a graduate of Miami University. Ms. Boldman serves as the executive director of the Kentucky Conservation Committee, one of the oldest and most successful environmental advocacy organizations in the state, where she has been since 2014. She's also served as the advocacy and outreach coordinator for the Kentucky Environmental Foundation and as a leader in multiple positions for the Sierra Club, a grassroots environmental organization founded in 1892 to preserve the wilderness and protect natural resources. Please welcome Lane Boldman.
So much.
Absolutely. Let me get this set up really quick for you.
And I appreciate our last presentation because environmental safety is dependent upon a strong workforce. So we also support high-level training. Nuclear has had a history. We do want to present it with a positive hope for the future, but we do have to recognize the issues of the past and make sure that we are very aware of how to deal with the challenges that it has had and it could have in the future because we're dealing with a lot of newer technologies, so they will present newer problems. Thank you. So the Kentucky Conservation Committee, we work pretty closely with state government. I want to recognize Danny Carroll, who's here. I served with him on one of the earlier committees on nuclear, and I really appreciate his attention to his community and bringing economic development to his district. So hopefully I won't say anything that puts people off nuclear. It's more to recognize the history and the challenges we have ahead. But we're going to talk about the history and environmental considerations. The big things that I'm going to focus on are waste issues, the long development timeline, will our pressures to find more energy more quickly, and the economic development incentives, impact our safety. And so I want people to consider that. And the technology still needs to be at scale, which it is not yet. So do I click on this? Is that a clicker? Yep. That's all right.
Move forward. Oh, that's interesting.
Oh.
Let's try that. Come on. This is standard U of L practice. A little technical issue for every presenter.
Okay. Oh, wait. And do I use the clicker on this or the arrows?
Either one should.
Okay. There we go. Now we're going. So the Kentucky Conservation Committee, you've already heard that we're one of the longest running state-based conservation nonprofits. And so we work with citizens and other nonprofits to keep them connected to what's happening in state government. So as it was already stated, there's no nuclear reactors in Kentucky yet. The primary nuclear activity had been the Paducah gaseous diffusion plant, and then Maxey Flats, which was the former low-level radioactive waste disposal facility. So the Biden administration in 2022 really kicked off a lot of this nuclear revival with incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act, investments in HALEU, in a high enriched uranium, and that also spurred interest in Kentucky's Energy and Environment Cabinet. They started working with a partnership at Consultants for Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear to explore the potential for small-scale nuclear power. And again, I want to acknowledge the senator for his work on that. And here's some of the bills that were involved to start reopening nuclear as a viable option for Kentucky, starting in 2017. Several bills passed to really set up this industry for its revival. Most recently, 10 million to create the Nuclear Energy Development Grant Program. And then there's also been federal actions, a lot of executive orders that have come out recently in the Trump administration to speed up nuclear reactor licensing, add 300 gigawatts of new nuclear capacity by 2050, lay the groundwork for faster reactor testing, deploy reactors for AI on military bases, explore fuel recycling, reprocessing, increase domestic fuel production, increase American nuclear workforce, assess spent nuclear fuel management, expand U.S. nuclear energy exports. And this is just a few of the things that came out in the executive orders. So there's a lot of enthusiasm right now for the industry and a lot of incentives to move things quicker. So that's part of the Unleashing America's Energy platform. So again, the Trump administration very much a champion of nuclear development. So what does all this mean for Kentucky? And what are the projects that are being discussed? Now, some of this you've heard a bit about already. Global laser uranium enrichment, GLE, looking for a viable technique, working on a viable technique to enrich 200,000 metric tons of depleted uranium tails. And then you also heard a bit about this, General Matter announced in 2025, they would be building a new enrichment plant with construction to begin in 2026. Includes leasing for reuse a 100-acre parcel of federal land on the former gaseous diffusion plant. And provides General Matter a minimum of 7,600 cylinders of existing depleted uranium hexafluoride to supply fuel re-enrichment operations. And then, as far as workforce goes, we're also, the state has also been looking at Eastern Kentucky. They, a couple of years ago, had a coal to nuclear seminar exploring economic potential of nuclear energy in Eastern Kentucky. So, there's a lot of focus on developing the workforce for this industry, as you just heard in the previous presentation. And then as on the generation side, GAIN released a 42-page report on the feasibility of nuclear at the Gent LG&E coal plant near Louisville. So that's another thing that has been looked at. The report found that the Gent site was suitable for small modular reactors, but it's constrained by size. So in the rush for new nuclear, new ways to apply it, the need for growing the artificial intelligence industry. It's created a real enthusiasm for expanding more energy as quickly as possible. Nuclear, of course, is playing a role in that. So what about the new technology? Of course, my focus is on environmental issues. So obviously I'm going to raise the affiliated issues on safety, but then also the cost, right? Because nuclear development, depending upon what area you're looking at, can take a very long time. It's got a very long timeline. The artificial intelligence industry is ready for more energy now. So we have a timeline gap here. There's other technologies that we tend to support, solar and battery storage, for example, because you can get that off the shelf right now, but there's a lot of advocacy around nuclear, but nuclear is going to have a much longer timeline. And of course, all these government incentives are designed to work with that. So advanced nuclear, I will admit I'm not a scientist, I'm an environmental advocate, but I try to do my research, so anyone is free to correct me. But there is no consistent definition. Refers to broadly many reactor types, light water reactors, the SMRs, and non-SMRs. or non-light water reactors, small but not modular, like what TerraPower and Natrium are developing. And then there's also microreactors. Several companies are working on that. So with regard to small modular reactors, the things we want to make sure that people are keeping an eye on are the cost, the life cycle, uh, environmental and health impacts, waste and storage, and security issues, right? So when we're starting to talk about more highly enriched processes, that does make it a target for military applications, et cetera. So, so some fundamental questions. Is new nuclear cheaper or safer? Now, this is from the Union of Concerned Scientists. SMRs are often marketed as less costly and quicker to build than large reactors, but there's no real evidence that they would be cheaper because none have been really manufactured at scale, at least at the time that I pulled this report. Now there's a lot going on right now. I could have missed some things, but at that time, nothing has gotten to the point of scale yet. Smaller reactors are subject to the economies of scale. So if it's a smaller reactor, it's going to produce more expensive electricity per kilowatt hour than a large one. And then their determination, small modular reactors are not generally safer or more secure than light water reactors. A smaller reactor may have less radioactive material, may be easier to cool by passive means, but these may not be as effective in certain weather conditions, for example. So, and they consider a Stanford University study from 2022 found that advanced reactors could produce 20 to 2 times to 30 times more radioactive waste per megawatt. So while all the power technologies might be capable of accidents, the impact of a nuclear accident, of course, is something we need to pay special attention to. Yes, it can be safer. Yes, there's many changes over the decades. I mean, I'm in my 60s. I come from a generation that dealt with the earlier nuclear. For those of you younger than me, you may not have the same history that I grew up with, but it does make you very aware of how essential having a good trained workforce, good safety practices are necessary. Because especially in a situation where you have a lot of incentives to build faster and cheaper, you want to pay particular attention because you can't really make mistakes with this. So basically follows the same cycle as water-cooled reactors. I'm going to skip over this one. So the Union of Concerned Scientists conclusions were that SMRs will not reduce the problem of what to do with radioactive waste. You still have to store waste on site right now. Smaller reactors means you're going to have more reactors. More reactors means you're going to have waste in more areas. If you have waste in more areas, there's more you have to monitor. So while the waste could still be managed responsibly, you do have to consider that it's a different landscape when we're talking about the small modular reactors, and something that people need to get used to. So entities that hope to acquire SMRs will still have to safely manage the storage of significant quantities and spent fuel on site for the long term. Until that changes, and I'm sure the Trump administration is looking at ways to streamline that, but that's where we are right now. And for the time being, there's still no realistic prospects for licensing of centralized storage of waste. So now let's take a minute and talk about the reprocessing of spent fuel. And again, I'll qualify, I'm not a scientist, but I try to find good sources. The sources say there are about 91,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel stored in nuclear plant sites around the US. And reprocessing has its pros and cons. It can reduce the volume of waste. It can also extend the fuel supply, extending energy produced from already mined uranium, and it can reduce long-term radioactivity. So there's some pluses. But it creates a highly concentrated radioactivity. So that means you really have to have good control systems. Um, and then, it's a costly process. It can be more expensive than mining new uranium, depending upon your technology. Um, and it wouldn't change the need for storage and disposal of nuclear waste. So those are things we need to look at. And what's interesting, because of the economics right now and the incentives and the need to build out AI as quickly as possible, because you're in a race with China, there are companies that are now looking at reopening the old reactors. So you're dealing with the new technology, and you might be dealing with the old technology as well. So these are the projects that are being looked at right now for restarting conventional projects. Either they're closed or they weren't completed. Um, and these units are being looked at right now. Google NextEra Energy to revive nuclear plant. So that raises some additional questions, right? So we have to deal with a workforce that's now trained for the new technology. And then we have to also look at what is it going to take to restart old power plants as well, which were built under different conditions. So the average US reactors are 43 years old. So the questions that I would explore are, what is the overall cost? Some proposed projects in the earlier list are reporting 10-figure budgets. What's the condition of the retired plant? What was its decommissioning status? What kind of technology had it used? Why was it retired or stalled? So we have to look at those questions as well. There are no new U.S. reactors that have ever restarted after beginning decommissioning work. There's no regulatory precedent for restarting construction on a nuclear plant after its federal license had been terminated. So that's where the training again comes into play, and the workforce challenges, because we may be trying to deal with multiple systems in a workforce, right? You've got different kinds of new technology, and then you're going to have to revisit these old technologies. So workforce development is really important here. So I'll just give some examples, not necessarily to put a damper on the economic development, but just, lessons learned, because in the 70s, it wasn't this similar. You had communities that were really excited about new technologies and nuclear and were quick to adopt it. Just during the Cold War, there was a lot of history and interest in nuclear. And so I'll just mention a couple lessons from the past. So we have Maxey Flats in Kentucky. And it had some issues. We found leakage on a very large site storing nuclear waste. Detected the presence of plutonium in the water. It needed a serious remediation. In 1976, EPA report found that the radionuclides were out of their trenches. They might be migrating into the ground, potentially hundreds of meters beyond the site trenches. So in 1990, it was found that the groundwater had levels up to 5 times the legal limit, was seeping into a hillside, and a temporary cap was installed in 2002. So along with developing the workforce to deal with the new technologies, we also need a workforce that's trained in how to manage the waste. And again, we've gone through almost a generation where we haven't had as much of that in the workforce, except for areas like Paducah that deal with it on a regular basis. So we need to take particular attention to how we develop that workforce as well. Here's just a list of some of the contaminants that were in Maxey Flats. Now, I grew up in Ohio, so we're going to switch gears to the town of Fernald. Fernald was one of the first major Superfund sites. And I, in my young years, knew nothing about this. And I lived 10 miles from it. Uranium processing and purification plant, the third largest nuclear waste dump in the U.S., commissioned in 1951. My town was chartered in 1958. Enriched 500 million pounds of uranium, 67% of the Cold War nuclear weapons program. Generated 1.5 billion pounds of radioactive waste, held the largest concentration of poisonous radon gas in the world. Polluted air, soil, and drinking water, and released millions of pounds of uranium dust discovered in 1984. That's about the time I moved out of town and went to college in Oxford, Ohio. Cleanup took 13 years at a cost of 4.4 billion. So this is the price we pay if we don't have good regulations, well-trained workforce, and anticipating, what could happen, because we're going to be dealing with more novel technologies. So we need to be thinking about this ahead of time. And we've learned a lot since then, right? So, hopefully we'll be a step ahead then from these times. The waste, 4.7 million tons landfilled on site, shipped to Texas, Nevada, and Arizona. And shipping is a factor as well. The nuclear impacts will travel. You can contain this stuff on site, but in the cleanup process, these materials were shipped many places. So the citizens that lived in Fernald, also citizens were monitored in the surrounding communities of Ross, Coleraine, and Fairfield, where I grew up. So there are some citizens that live near the plant or near the disposal site that still continue to be checked as part of a legacy health program. So then you have to think about not just the workers, but do you have the health systems in place should there be any issues? So, like I said, in around 84, I moved to Oxford, Ohio. Found out the nuclear also moved to Oxford, Ohio. I just learned this recently when I was doing some recap of Fernald for a reporter. The college town of Oxford is 20 miles north of Fernald. And I recently ran across a report called The Atomic Lab Next Door from the University of Kansas, and found out that a professor had been, I guess, contracted, was taking processed uranium from Fernald, sent it to a shop he had called the Alba Craft Lab in Oxford to turn fuel into slugs for nuclear reactors. The details of this were kept from the public until 1993. I went to school there in the late 80s. Knew nothing about this. So to build public trust in the communities, you really have to be transparent about these operations. People will feel safe if they feel like they've been engaged, right? So if our goal is to develop a highly qualified workforce and also make sure the communities are on board, we have to be as transparent as possible. And hopefully we've learned lessons from days like this. So when I read the report, it said the contamination was not fully clean until 1997. There were 6 children in a family that lived next door to the facility. 5 developed thyroid cancer. So again, I hope we've learned from those days. What really stunned me, though, when I read the report is that I thought at first this facility might be in one of the rural areas around the college town. It was a block and a half from my college apartment. It was right in the middle of town. So, these are the things that will cause communities to not be trusting of new nuclear when these things are presented. So the more we can build in those safety requirements, good regulations, and well-trained healthcare systems, to make the public at ease that we've learned from these situations, and we can really build a culture where people can trust the industry. So that's the fundamental question. Will our new enthusiasm for nuclear be tempered by some of these lessons? And will the recent deregulation efforts and economic development pressures impact our safety? Our goal is that that does not happen, correct? So you want to make sure that when you're looking at workforce, you're also thinking about how to manage the safety issues. You want to have emergency planning zones. You want to have good plans for waste management, because they will still pose environmental burdens. And you want to have good oversight. Now, right now, the oversight in state government is this, and federal government is the Center for Disease Control. And at the state, it's the Department for Public Health and Radioactive Materials Program under the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. But right now, those departments are dealing more with like low level, x-rays and, things like that. They have to be, when you're looking at the workforce, you need to think about how you're going to beef these programs up as well. And then, of course, there's always the human factor, right? So you may have the best technology, you may have the best regulations, you may have the best plans. People are still people. We have to make sure that we have built in, multiple levels of responsibility. There was a situation that just happened in Ohio. The utilities are paying $250 million over a bribery scandal. Now, I didn't dig into the details of that. But people are people, things happen. So we need to make sure that we've got the tools in place when we build out this new industry, because it is dealing with something that's more novel. So you want to invest in human capital, training operations, like we've heard in the earlier presentation. You need to be transparent and inclusive, make sure that the communities are on board. You want to have sufficient community engagement, talk at their level, work with them as this goes along, not after the fact as a buy-in, right? And then you want to ensure that these projects have economic resilience, that they're not projects that come into a community and then leave the community and then they're left with the waste, not enough jobs now. You want to have a long-term plan for communities to be a good partner in building up this new industry. And, I can't say enough about early, often community engagement. And that's how you build the trust, and we don't have to worry so much about the environmental issues, right? So the question I'll leave you with is, are we going to get it right this time? What have we learned from the 70s? How can we make it better? Thank you very much.